Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 274. Lucy Benson. Lucy Charlotte Benson was an Australian organist, musician, theatrical entrepreneur and a conductor, when the rest of the conductors in Tasmania were all men. Lucy produced over 30 major operas and musicals and was the most gifted and productive leading amateurs of her time. Lucy's legacy was as a teacher, composer and director, and she changed the musical and cultural landscape of Tasmania. She was friends with Nellie, Melba, and Amy Sherwin was known as the Tasmanian Nightingale, and she considered Lucy to be one of the best teachers of voice production in the colonies. Lucy Charlotte Benson was born Lucy Charlotte Westbrook on the 1st of March 1860 in Hobart, Tasmania. She was the eldest child of 10 to Frances Elizabeth Lempriere, known as Fanny, who herself was a gifted singer, and Thomas Westbrook, who was an auctioneer. Her father was born on the 18th of September 1832 in Hobart to Dr. James Henry Westbrook and Elizabeth Chappell. His parents were English, and James died in 1839 in Sydney when Thomas was only 7. The Sydney Australasian Chronicle outlined his death on the 13th of December 1839. On Tuesday the 11th of December, at the residence of Captain Biscoe of Churchill, after a long and painful illness of asthma, which he bore with Christian fortitude and resignation, J.H. Westbrook, Esquire, aged 50, for many years a resident in Hobart Town, Van Diemen's Land, from whence the deceased recently came up on the ship the Medway for the benefit of his health. He leaves a large family, a most amiable widow, and a numerous circle of friends to deplore his loss. Thomas Westbrook married Elizabeth Lindley in Oatlands, Tasmania in November 1856 when he was 24 and Elizabeth 20. They had a son, Thomas William, who died at 3 days old in Hobart, and Elizabeth died only 2 days after her infant son. He then married Lucy's mother Fanny on the 12th of April 1859 in Hobart. Thomas died on the 13th of September 1911 in Hobart, and the Hobart Mercury announced his death. The death has occurred at the age of 79 of a well-known citizen in the person of Mr. Thomas Westbrook. He was born in Hobart in 1832, being the fifth son of the late Dr. G.H. Westbrook. After leaving school at the early age of 13, he entered the office of Lowes and McMichael auctioneers. He eventually succeeded to the business under the style of Brent and Westbrook, and upon Mr. Brent retiring, he carried on the business for many years, until he, together with his second son, Charles P. Westbrook, who predeceased him, entered in the late partnership with the late W. Abbott and his sons under the style of Westbrook, Abbott and Company. Upon the dissolution of this partnership, he joined his late brother Richard under the style of Westbrook Brothers. He retired from active business 13 years ago. The deceased was a resident of Ballaree for over 30 years and took an active part in the church work there at Sandford, Rockaby and South Arm. He was a sole survivor of the original trustees of the Mariners' Church. He built the Ballaree Institute in 1867 and presented it as a gift to the residents. He was president and trustee of it until his death. The deceased was an enthusiastic rifleman and cricketer and was one of the team that played against the first English team to visit Tasmania. The deceased leaves a widow, 6 sons and 4 daughters. Lucy's mother, Fanny Lempriere, was the daughter of Thomas James Lempriere and was born on the 15th of April 1840 at Port Arthur. Her father, Thomas, was born on the 11th of January 1796 at Hamburg, Germany. He was the son of Thomas Lempriere, a British banker and merchant of Norman Jersey descent, and his wife Harriet Allen. In 1803, Thomas Lempriere was interned by the French, but owing to his youth was soon released to join his mother in England. His father conducted a banking house at Calais and remained interned until the armistice of 1813, when he rejoined his family in England and resumed business there as a merchant. In 1822, Thomas emigrated to Van Diemen's Land on the Regalia. In Hobart Town on the 29th of May 1823, he married Charlotte Smith, and they had 12 children. He received a grant of land and became a merchant and a foundation shareholder of the Bank of Van Diemen's Land.
He was joined by his parents and sisters in 1825 when his father formed a merchant business in Hobart trading as Lempereur and Company, which failed in 1827. He left the company in 1826 for employment in the Commiserate Department as a storekeeper at the penal settlements Maria Island and Macquarie Harbour. In 1831 he was transferred to the Commiserate headquarters at Hobart as a clerk. He was then promoted as Deputy Assistant Commissary General on the 20th of January 1837 and Assistant Commissary General in December 1844. On the 25th of May 1846 he was also appointed a coroner for Tasmania. He was recalled to England in 1849 for immediate transfer as Assistant Commissary General in Hong Kong. After a brief service, he was invalided at home in 1851, but he died on the voyage on the 6th of January 1852 at the age of 56 and is buried at Aden. Lempereur was a regular diarist and gathered his observations of the convict stations at which he served for publication under the title The Penal Settlements of Van Diemen's Land. His artistic talent was well known, and he was commissioned to paint landscapes and portraits of many prominent settlers. He also maintained a keen interest in natural history and was prominent amongst the early collectors who provided specimens of Tasmanian animals and plants for study in England. Charlotte was English and she lived till the age of 87 years. Lucy's mother Fanny's death was announced in the Hobart Mercury on the 17th of December 1923. Mrs. Fanny Westbrook passed away at her residence, Eastbourne, at Sandy Bay on Saturday. The deceased lady was the widow of the late Mr. Thomas Westbrook and was the daughter of the late Mr. Thomas James Lempereur, Assistant Commissary General, and was born at Port Arthur in 1840. She delighted to talk of the old times, having a splendid memory up to the last. She was a teacher in the old St. David's Sunday School and was married in the old church and was a member of the choir under the late Mr. Fred Packer's father. Going to live at Riesel, Bellarive, then known as Kangaroo Point, in 1862, she took an active interest and participation in the work of St. Mark's Church and also of the inauguration of the Bellarive Social Institute and Library in 1867. Leaving Bellarive in 1894 to reside in Sandy Bay, she became a regular attendant of St. Matthias Choir and afterwards, up until June, in the choir of the new Church of St. Peter. At a special service at church on one occasion, 4 generations sang in the choir. Mrs. Westbrook, Mrs. L.C. Benson, Mrs. Beryl Wilson and Donald Wilson. Lucy was educated privately. She studied singing with Del Sarte and Madame Emery Gould and piano with Herr Gernert of Melbourne and later with Fraulein Meyer and F.A.G. Packer. At the age of 10, Lucy was playing as an organist in 3 churches each Sunday, and later she was an organist at 4 Hobart churches of various denominations. She was described as having a sweet voice that lingered in the memory and sang in many concerts, managed, directed and conducted light operas, and was perhaps the first female conductor of opera in the Australian theatre. She produced most of Gilbert and Sullivan and had been the female lead in HMS Pinafore in 1879. She continued being the lead in HMS Pinafore for 18 months. The other actors in this play were her aunt, Emily Dobson, and William Benson. She married William Benson in the Hobart suburb of Bellarive in 1881. The Hobart Mercury announced the marriage. On Thursday, June the 2nd at St. Mark's Church in Bellarive, William, the youngest son of Dr. Benson of Sydney, to Lucy Charlotte, eldest daughter of Thomas Westbrook, Roselle Villa, Bellarive. William was 8 years older than Lucy. He'd been born in Hobart in April 1852 to William Sr. and Frances Lakeland, who'd married in Launceston in May 1844. His father, William Benson, was the health officer for the Port of Hobart Town, and his appointment was announced in the Tasmanian Daily News of Hobart Town on the 16th of May 1856. He resigned on the 8th of June 1865 as a surgeon. Frances Lakeland, William Benson's mother, was born on the 8th of February 1828 in Hobart. She was the youngest child of John Lakeland and Mary Arndell. John was English and had arrived in Sydney in 1815 and in 1816 became the acting Provost Marshal when the then Marshal was suspended in Tasmania. On the 15th of July 1818, Lieutenant Governor William Sorrell appointed John Lakeland as Engineer and Inspector of Public Works in Hobart. He had 3 servants and a salary of £75. And the announcement of Frances' parents' marriage was placed in the paper, saying John Lakeland and Mary Louise Arndell, the daughter of Surgeon Thomas Arndell, in St. David's Cathedral in Hobart on the 18th of August 1818. Mary Arndell had been born in Parramatta, New South Wales in 1793 to Thomas Arndell and Elizabeth Burley. Thomas had 6 children with Susanna Boyser from 1772 when he was 19 and Susanna 16, but only one child, John, survived childhood. John had been born on the 11th of December 1771 in London, and Susanna died in 1796. John remained in England for medical training and then arrived into New South Wales aboard the Marquis of Cornwallis in February 1796. He was appointed as the assistant to the surgeon on Norfolk Island. He arrived on Norfolk Island on the HM Supply in April 1796, and Elizabeth Jackson was also on this ship. She was a convict and had come out also on the Marquis of Cornwallis. Elizabeth had been convicted in a Dublin court for stealing goods, and she was sentenced to 7 years transportation to New South Wales. Governor Hunter wrote to Lieutenant Governor King on the 22nd of March 1796 informing him that John Arndell, son of Thomas, was being sent to Norfolk Island to assist at the hospital. John Arndell and Elizabeth Jackson had a son Samuel in 1797 on Norfolk Island. John is listed in the Victualling book on Norfolk Island as a surgeon, and then he returned to New South Wales aboard the Francis in July 1796. He married Maria Hensley, a convict from the Indispensable who came out in 1796, in Parramatta in 1797. John Arndell returned to England and married Jane Potter on the 20th of November 1800. He died in 1807 at St Marylebone, Westminster, London. Their son Thomas, Mary Arndell's father, commenced a relationship with Elizabeth Burley, who was 12 years younger than Thomas. She'd been tried and convicted for stealing 14 handkerchiefs. She was sentenced at the Old Bailey on the 14th of September 1785 to 7 years transportation. She was 20 and she sailed on the 12th of May 1787 on board the Lady Penrhyn that departed Portsmouth, England, bound for Australia. At this time she conceived a child after a liaison with a seaman on the Lady Penrhyn, John Clements. She arrived on the First Fleet on the 26th of January 1788 and then gave birth to a daughter, Frances Hannah Clements, while the Lady Penrhyn was anchored in Botany Bay. If you want to know more about the Lady Penrhyn, I did an episode 66, on 2 convict women in particular who acted as midwives on the Lady Penrhyn, and who no doubt one of them delivered this baby. Elizabeth and Thomas married at St Matthew's Church in Windsor in New South Wales by Reverend Samuel Marsden in 1807. They'd already had 6 of their 7 children by this stage. Frances was the only child born in wedlock. Thomas Arndell died on the 2nd of May 1821 at the age of 69. And there is a plaque saying he was one of the earliest civil officers in the medical department and one of the oldest magistrates of the colony, and was humane and honourable in each station. He was publicly esteemed and privately beloved. An affectionate husband, kind parent and firm friend, he has left few to surpass him. He was simple in his manners and upright in his conduct. And Elizabeth died in 1843 at the age of 78. On the 14th of June 1804, Thomas Arndell was granted 600 acres of land at the junction of Hawkesbury River, which included a creek known later as Cateye Creek. This was granted by Governor King. The farm became the Arndell's permanent residence, and Thomas named it Cateye. The first home on Cateye was a small timber dwelling near the river. The home began in 1816 but was not completed until 1823, after Thomas's death. Getting back to Mary Arndell's husband, John Lakeland, on the 5th of January 1820, John succeeded Thomas Cowder as the principal superintendent of convicts in Tasmania. In 1825, he resigned as the Assistant Inspector of Public Works, and he was granted 300 acres by Governor Lachlan Macquarie. In 1825, Governor Sir Thomas Brisbane granted John Lakeland a further 300 acres of land for farming purposes. John Lakeland died after a short illness at his residence in Pittwater, Tasmania, on the 26th of November 1828. He was only 37. His funeral was attended by Lieutenant Governor Sir George Arthur. Frances was only 9 months old when her father died. Her mother went on to marry Thomas White in Hobart in February 1831. However, she died in May 1835 at the age of only 42. Frances was only 7 at this time. So you can see that between Lucy and her husband, that they had quite prominent citizens in early Tasmania as their family members. So getting back to Lucy, her musical career continued unabated. In 1901, she sang before the Duke and Duchess of York, and 2 years later her choir won the Eisteddfod at Bathurst, New South Wales. Returning through Sydney, they gave a concert and the Daily Telegraph praised their high discipline, admirable finish and effective control. In 1905, Lucy took an enlarged choir, which included 8 of her family, to Ballarat, where they won the Championship of the Commonwealth. On their return, they received a civic welcome in the streets of Hobart from the city band and its inhabitants. At this stage, Lucy Benson, by her musical activities, had raised £1,600 for charity. Not surprisingly, she was lauded in a verse in the press as able to undermine a mountain and referred to as the great commanding spirit of the South who could organise high heaven. For half a century, there were few musical occasions in Tasmania, religious or secular, in which she had no hand, either as a manager, conductor, soloist, director, accompanist, or a costume designer. Sometimes she combined all of these functions for one event. Her teaching, which was based on a thorough grounding in enunciation and the art of breathing, was another important aspect of her career. Lucy Benson's accompaniments were described as magnetic by one commentator. Her husband William died on the 24th of February 1913 at his residence at Bellarive. He was 61. The obituary in the paper reads, "The death of Mr. William Benson took place at his residence yesterday morning. He was the youngest son of the late Dr. Benson, an old Imperial officer. For nearly 40 years of his life, he was a member of the Civil Service of Tasmania and for the past 10 years had occupied in the Treasury Department the position of Receiver and Paymaster for this state and the Commonwealth. He was married in 1882 to a daughter of the late Mr. Thomas Westbrook, who survives him, and 4 sons and 2 daughters, one of whom is married to Mr. Seymour Wilson. Mr. Benson's death will be much felt by a large circle of friends who will miss a true, loyal and good fellow. He enjoyed the respect and, in a marked degree, the affectionate regard of his fellow members in the civil service, while his courtesy of manner and natural sweetness of disposition made him deservedly popular with those who had contact with him officially or privately. Mr. Benson possessed a very pretty quality of his tenor voice, and those of past generations will recall with pleasure with which they heard him in opera and concert many years ago, when his services were always available in aid of deserving objects. On the 3rd of August 1915, in the Clunes Guardian and Gazette in Victoria, it mentions that the audience looked forward with pleasurable anticipations to the reappearance of Madame Benson in Clunes and were not disappointed. On the 2nd of August 1919, in the Burnie Advocate, I read with great interest the announcement in your column that Mrs. Lucy Benson intends, following her profession of teaching, singing on the northwest coast. It is now many years since I first heard Mrs. Benson sing. She is an artiste to her fingertips, and this is not remarkable when it is considered that she is the pupil of Antonio Dolores, that peerless French soprano. But she is more than a pupil of Dolores, she is a personal friend of that songstress. When Dolores was in Tasmania, she had Mrs. Benson with her during the whole of the tour. Mrs. Benson's career as a singer has been a distinguished one, but it has been as a teacher that she has displayed brilliant talent. She seems to have that happy knack of imparting knowledge, which is by no means common amongst the exponents of her profession. Under her conductorship, the Hobart Comic Opera Company has risen to great heights, and she scored distinct and unusual success with the choirs she's taken to the mainland. I desire to pay my tribute to one so distinguished in her profession and wish her every success on the northwest coast. In 1926, she directed the comic opera The Toreador, or How Sammy Gig Won the Bullfight. She returned to Hobart in 1928 and took part in broadcasting. For relaxation, she specialised in violet breeding and raising prize poultry. On the 17th of March 1937, in the Hobart Mercury, all music lovers in Hobart must recently have wished Mrs. Lucy Benson most heartily many returns on her 77th birthday. Mrs. Benson has always identified herself most enthusiastically with music in Hobart. And on the 1st of March 1940, in the Hobart Mercury, Mrs. L.C. Benson's 80th birthday. Mrs. L.C. Benson of Sandy Bay celebrates the 80th anniversary of her birthday today. She is the eldest daughter of the late Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Westbrook of Eastbourne, Sandy Bay, Hobart. Mrs. Benson, well known throughout Tasmania and the mainland, has had a unique musical career. Her musical education began early in life. She continued her useful work for 65 years, during which time she occupied the position of organist and conductor of St Mark's Bellerive, St George's Battery Point in Hobart, Davy Street Congregational, the Hobart Methodist Church at Sandy Bay, the Presbyterian Church at Burnie, St George's in Burnie, and the Holy Trinity in Rochester, Victoria. Upon her return from the mainland, she was appointed organist of St Peter's in Sandy Bay, from which position she retired in 1935 and is at present a member of St David's Cathedral Choir. At an early age, Mrs Benson took leading roles in operatic performances, to which she was ably assisted by her husband, the late Mr W. Benson, son of Dr Benson of Hobart, who was the possessor of a beautiful tenor voice. Their son, Charles Benson of Sydney, has followed in his father's footsteps. Mrs Benson's spare time was devoted to performances for charitable purposes, which have not only been successful artistically, but have returned £1,200 for distribution amongst various charitable institutions of Hobart. On one occasion, the Blind, Deaf and Dumb Institution was in financial difficulties, and Mrs Benson reproduced the opera HMS Pinafore at the Theatre Royal, when she was ably assisted by her cousin, the late Admiral Sir John Parry, whose warship was in Hobart at the time. Sailors and Marines from the vessel helped the cause. Mrs Benson has conducted many choirs at musical competitions, notably at the Ballarat Eisteddfod, bringing back to Hobart 6 first prizes, 4 seconds and 2 honourable mentions. She's helped in every possible way to augment funds at the time of the 1914 to 1918 war, and her youngest son, Jack Errol Benson, a Gallipoli hero in the 12th Battalion, paying the supreme sacrifice. Lucy was still a church organist when she was 83, and she died in 1943 in Sandy Bay. The Burnie Advocate placed an obituary in the paper. Mrs Lucy Charlotte Benson, a musician well known in Tasmania and mainland circles, died in Hobart tonight. Mrs Benson formerly resided at Burnie and Ulverstone and had been an organist for numerous churches throughout the state and a conductress of many choirs. She began her musical career at the age of 7 when she played a duet with her grandmother, Mrs Lempereur, at an important function. At the age of 10, she was the morning organist at St Mark's Church, Bellerive, an afternoon organist at Sanford, and an evening organist at Rokeby. She had assisted as an organist or conductor, and sometimes both, at many churches. At an early age, she took a leading part in light opera. She was a successful teacher of singing and conducted many operas in which she was assisted by her daughters, Mrs Dees Thompson and Mrs Royal Taylor of Hobart. Her sons, Mr Dare Gerald Benson and Mr Charles Benson, are noted tenor. Her choirs and pupils gained many successes, but she raised money for Hobart charities by her musical functions and was a successful organiser of church and charitable efforts on the northwest coast. The medal she won in 1903 is part of the collection at the Tasmania Museum and Art Gallery. And a little on her and William's children. The firstborn was Beryl Lakeland Benson, who was born on the 8th of July 1882 in Clarence, Tasmania. She married Seymour Wilson in August 1906 in Hobart when she was 24 and Seymour 23, and they had 3 children. They farmed at Riverton, Tasmania, and divorced in 1922. On the 14th of September 1922, in the Hobart Mercury, it outlined the divorce case. In the practice court today, in the divorce case of Mrs Beryl M. Wilson residing at Burnie against Seymour T.B. Wilson, farmer, the petition being on the grounds of desertion. Counsel asked the trial take place at Burnie on the 10th of October and that the evidence be taken orally. Mr Lodge appeared for the respondent and opposed the motion on the grounds that when the citation was extracted, the respondent was domiciled in New Zealand and desired to appeal against the decision, in which Mr Justice Ewing of Burnie held that the respondent, for the purposes of the petition, was domiciled in Tasmania and opposed the trial of the petition at Burnie. He read an affidavit by the respondent stating that in 1920 he was a resident at Hawke's Bay district of New Zealand and subsequently got employment in Auckland, and in 1921 he had a dairy farm 100 miles north of Auckland on which he laid out his remaining capital of under £300. He sustained losses and had to give it up and got employment on a dairy farm, also at a butter factory and on a station, and has now returned to Tasmania, staying with friends, but is out of employment. He hopes to go back to New Zealand when prospects there improved, intending to make New Zealand his permanent home. Council upon this submitted that the court had no jurisdiction to hear the petition in Tasmania, that the Tasmanian Parliament had no right to pass a law on the question of domicile, which would affect the right of a New Zealand citizen, and so the respondent entered a protest against the petition and said that he had no means to go to Burnie to contest the petition. The respondent was prepared to show that his conduct towards his wife was not blamable, and that the petitioner's conduct towards him was blamable, and he had not the means to go to Burnie and engage counsel there and could not appear in Hobart. His Honour said, Mr Justice Ewing made an order settling the question of domicile, and Mr Page now asks to have the time and mode of trial of the petition at Burnie fixed. If the respondent wants to appeal against the decision, I'm prepared to adjourn this morning's application to a reasonable date. He agreed with this adjournment, but he intimated that if the trial of the petition was to be heard in Hobart instead of Burnie, the respondent would have to put up a sum of money to pay the expenses of the petitioner and her witnesses in coming from Burnie. Beryl then commenced a relationship with Edward Dees Thompson in 1923. She sang with her brother Charles in many Tasmanian events, and she died at the age of 91 on the 16th of April 1974 in Hobart. The second child was William Dare Benson, known as Dare, who was born on the 26th of September 1884 at Clarence, Tasmania. He died on the 2nd of April 1913 in Mildura, Victoria. He was only 28 and he died only 6 weeks after his father died. The Hobart Mercury outlined his death. The news of Dare Benson's death was received with deep and genuine regret by all Hobart yachtsmen, and sincere sympathy was expressed with his relations. He will be very much missed by the members of the RYCT, as he was always ready to assist at social entertainments both afloat and ashore. He had become seriously indisposed and was ordered away to a warmer climate. Like his father, he was always ready to assist at entertainments for charitable purposes and was very popular with his clubmates. His clubmates have arranged to give him a benefit at His Majesty's Theatre on Monday, where special yachting pictures will be produced, and I hope to see a bumper house. The third child was Gerald Lempereur Benson, who was born on the 3rd of October 1887 in Clarence, Tasmania. He moved to Victoria in November 1911 and married Dorothea Reid in Oakley, Victoria on the 11th of October 1913. Dorothea was also born in Tasmania and moved to Victoria in 1910. They had 2 daughters, one in 1914 and one in 1924. He was a bank clerk with the Union Bank of Australia when living in Lock, Victoria in 1914, and then he moved to Maryborough, Victoria in 1919 until 1928. In June 1928, he was appointed manager of the Tarnagulla branch of the Union Bank. Dorothea left Tarnagulla in October 1934, and on Boxing Day 1936, Gerald asked his wife why she treated him so coldly, and she said that she'd done all she could to make her and the children happy. She replied that she had lost all affection for him and that there could never be anything more between them, and she never wanted to live with him again. He attempted again for a reconciliation in May 1939 and said that he would contemplate divorce proceedings if she did not come back to Tarnagulla and live with him. She wrote Gerald a letter. It is no use you writing and asking me to come back to you. I have already told you I will never live wherever you are. I lost all affection I ever had for you. You threaten to divorce me for desertion if I do not return. If you desire a divorce, go ahead. I won't defend the case. I am quite content to live away from you, as I have done for over 4 years now. Please do not worry me again with your efforts for reconciliation, as it is all useless. Dorothy. As a result, they divorced in March 1940, and Gerald died in Inglewood, Victoria on the 9th of March 1967 at the age of 79. Their next child was Charles Westbrook Benson, who was born on the 3rd of July 1891 in Clarence, Tasmania. On the 3rd of March 1897 in the Tasmanian News, in the HMS Pinafore musical, another enthusiastic and fashionable audience assembled at the Theatre Royal last evening to witness the second production of Sir Arthur Sullivan's comic opera, HMS Pinafore. Mrs. Benson was successful as Little Buttercup and fully sustained this character. At every appearance she was heartily received and recalled several times during the evening, establishing herself as a great favourite. Master Charles Benson made himself quite at home with the audience with his song The Midshipmite, being prettily rendered, and the audience demanded an encore. So here he was at only 6 years old. In the Hobart Mercury on the 21st of October 1905, so when he was 14, Mrs. Benson and the Hobart Choir left here to take part in the Ballarat musical competitions and arrived at Ballarat on the 17th of October. They were warmly welcomed and proceeded to show their work. The vocal trio of Mrs. MacDonald and Beryl Benson and Charles Benson took first in the vocal duet for mixed voices. The following third places were obtained, and it mentions Charles Benson for boys under 16. In 1914, in the Tasmanian census, Charles is listed as living at Anstey Barton at Oatlands, and he was an overseer. He married Eleanor Davis on the 11th of June 1917 in Sorrel, Tasmania, and they had 2 children, one in 1923 and one in 1926. In January 1925 in the Hobart Mercury, it mentions that Cup Night, a special added attraction, Mr. Charles Benson, the famous Tasmanian baritone, at the Strand Theatre Deluxe. On the 20th of October 1931 in the Hobart Mercury, grand concert tomorrow night, Charles Benson, Tasmania's gifted baritone, assisted by Myra Gillan, Mr. Scott Power and Miss Joan Scott Power. By request, Miss Myra Gillan and Mr. Charles Benson will sing a duet. On the 21st of November 1931 in the Hobart Mercury, in the Richmond Hall this evening, a concert will be given by Mr. Charles Benson, assisted by Miss Myra Gillan, Miss Valerie Harper, Mr. Carter, Mr. Gunn and Philip Westbrook. Mrs. L.C. Benson will be the musical directress. On the 2nd of February 1932 in the Hobart Mercury, grand performance of Mass at St Cecilia by combined choirs and full professional orchestra at the Town Hall, soloists Lila Harvey, Leo Fisher and Charles Benson as a baritone. On the 3rd of February 1932 in the Hobart Mercury, tonight at the Town Hall, in the presence of His Excellency the Governor-General and Lady Isaacs, His Excellency the Lieutenant-Governor and Lady Nichols and Commodore Holbrook, Charles Benson, Tasmania's gifted baritone, with J. Scott Power as city organist, Myra Gillan as contralto and Joan Scott Power as pianist. In the Hobart Mercury at the Bellarive Theatre, grand concert, Charles Benson, Mrs. Dees Thompson, and in brackets Beryl Benson, Miss Valerie Harper, Mr. Jack Carter, Mr. Jack Gunn and Mr. Philip Westbrook. And on the 13th of May 1932 in the Hobart Mercury, it says Mr. Charles Benson held a farewell concert at the Oatlands Theatre on Wednesday night on the eve of his departure to America. Assisting him were Miss Myra Gillan, Eula Royal Taylor and Mr. Gunn. Madam Lucy Benson was the accompanist. There was a large audience, every available seat being taken within a few minutes of opening the doors. A crowded and representative gathering, which included the Mayor and Mayoress, followed with marked enthusiasm the farewell song recital given at Hobart Town Hall last night. Mr. Benson enjoys a high reputation as a ballad singer, and all those qualities, his evident sincerity, his warmth of expression, careful diction and fine voice control, which have won golden opinions in the past, once again roused to the highest pitch of enthusiasm a body of listeners who included not only old friends, but also many who were drawn by a purely musical interest. It is gratifying to note that Mr. Benson is not content to rest on his laurels as a ballad singer, but is ceaselessly striving to widen the range of his art. In all, he sang 4 groups of songs. When the long program came to an end, there were scenes of the wildest enthusiasm. The many farewell gifts to Mr. Benson included a travelling case, a travelling rug, a watch, a fountain pen and a wallet. Mr. Benson, speaking very feelingly, thanked the audience most heartedly for the kind reception and said he would bid them au revoir and not goodbye, as he hoped some day to come back and meet them all again. And on the 26th of May 1932 in the Launceston Examiner, Mr. Benson is well and favourably known in Launceston. At the Easter competitions last year, he was highly praised for his musical adjudicator, Dr. Floyd, who predicted a successful career for him should he go abroad to study. He excels in singing ballads, and last night his power of expression, splendidly clear enunciation and modest sincerity delighted his audience. Mr. Benson's been acclaimed as an artist with great gifts and a capacity of expression that should take him very far. And in the Launceston Examiner on the 18th of July 1934, Mr. Charles Benson, formerly of Hobart, who will be remembered by having given farewell concerts, including one in Launceston before leaving Tasmania, writes in London to a friend in Launceston. Everything is so different with us out in Australia. It is slow work to advance here. Most of my engagements consist of singing at large homes, clubs, dinners and on the BBC. I give my second recital on the 28th of June and one sings for 15 minutes on the National. We are divided into 2 groups. One generally shares the recital with a prominent pianist or instrumentalist. It is considered a big honour to sing on the National. At this particular time, I am singing it is broadcast to 9 other stations and many stations on the continent, so one is heard by many thousands of listeners who seem to be keener than ever, as they have little portable sets now in their cars, and one often hears music floating from them when they go on their way. Some very notable engagements have come my way. Singing for Lord and Lady Stradbroke, the Dowager Lady Swithling, and Miss Baden-Powell. It is a most interesting ensemble to sing to, and it always leads to other engagements if one pleases. I had the honour to sing at the Savage Club recently. Only the best artists are supposed to perform, and it was a delight to me to sing with Norman Allen, Parry Jones and Raymond Newell, as well as Jack Hassel, the great cartoonist, who gave an example of his art. Last week, my engagements consisted of singing at a reception at the Royal Empire Society, a fashionable wedding at St Mark's, St John's Wood, and at a recital with the London Sonata Players at St Albans. This coming Sunday, I sing at the London Musical Club, which is considered to be of high standard. Critics are expecting me to do very well. I've heard all of the greatest present-day artists, and Gigli, the Italian tenor, is supreme. So on the 30th of March 1935 in the Hobart Mercury, it let the readers know that Charles Benson, the well-known Tasmanian tenor, will participate in a British Broadcasting Corporation program tomorrow morning. An attempt will be made by 7ZL Hobart to pick up the broadcast and relay it to the benefit of Tasmanian listeners. Charles Benson has been studying in England and the continent for the last 2.5 years. And on the 4th of May 1938 in the Hobart Mercury, Mrs. L.C. Benson will leave Hobart by the Otranto on Saturday to visit her son, Mr. Charles Benson, the Tasmanian tenor, and Mrs. Benson at Camberwell, Victoria. She'll be away until October. On the 16th of May 1939, this year has been an active one for the Tasmanian Association. The party at Sydney's leading cabaret, preparations are well in hand for the association's concert party at the State Conservatorium of Music on the 3rd of June, when Mr. Charles Benson, the Tasmanian tenor, will give his first big recital in Sydney. On the 17th of May 1940 in the Hobart Mercury, a recital was given by Charles Benson at the Hobart Town Hall last night. He had a wide range of interesting compositions, chosen with discrimination and some with artistry. Lady Clark, accompanied by Miss Joan McLennan, the private secretary to the Governor, and the Lady Mayoress were among the audience. The Tasmanian tenor has an excellent voice. His powers impress me as having developed added strength. A more rounded quality proclaimed itself throughout his range, although at times he sought refuge in his rich middle register. The 2 operatic selections were beautifully phrased. Ballads comprised the second half of the program. Mrs. Lucy Benson played the Tasmanian song Calling You. Accompanied support was given by the Sydney pianist and organist Henry Tinkler. On the 21st of May 1940 in the Burnie Advocate, it says at a Red Cross concert that much interest is being taken in the concert at the Town Hall tomorrow evening, when the noted Tasmanian tenor Mr. Charles Benson and Mrs. Dees Thompson of Hobart will give a concert. And on the 23rd of May 1940 in the Burnie Advocate, a musical recital by the Tasmanian tenor Mr. Charles Benson at the Town Hall last evening merited greater patronage than was accorded. Mr. Benson has an excellent voice, and his numbers, like those of Mrs. Beryl Dees Thompson, were enthusiastically applauded. Mr. Benson's renditions included popular songs by English and foreign composers, while Mrs. Dees Thompson was heard to advantage a range of numbers. And on the 31st of December 1940 in the Hobart Mercury, celebrity artists visiting the state under the auspices of the Broadcasting Commission were few but distinguished. There was a range of vocalists listed, and then it says other vocalists who gave enjoyable platform and studio recitals were Lord Lugan and Charles Benson, the latter assisted by Henry Tinkler, organist of Sydney. And Charles died on the 25th of December 1977 in Tasmania at the age of 86. Their 5th child, Eula Lempriere Benson, was born on the 10th of January 1894 at Bellarive in Tasmania. She married John Taylor, an Englishman, on the 4th of November 1923 in Tasmania, when she was 29 and John 38. John was a clerk and they had 2 children. Their son was named Dare after her brother in 1924 and a daughter Dawn in 1926. Eula died on the 17th of May 1983 at Bellarive, Tasmania, aged 89. Their 6th child, Jack Errol Benson, was born on the 21st of November 1897 at Bellarive. He died on the 3rd of September 1915 in Egypt. He died of wounds at the Dardanelles and he was aged only 17. So I hope you enjoyed the story of Lucy Benson, her achievements, her children's achievements, and also the distinguished members of families from both her husband's and her sides.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.